Hello listeners, we are your co-hosts Janine Bailey and Marie Quigley for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart and soul.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. And I'm here today without my wonderful business partner Marie Quigley, who is somewhere in Italy right now, I believe. I'm here instead with my wonderful guest, Charly Cox. I'm so delighted that you're here, Charly. Welcome.
Thanks, Janine. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. It's nice and warm today. Or maybe it's not nice and warm. Maybe it's just a little bit too warm today, which is interesting that we're having such hot weather that I've brought you onto this podcast today to talk about climate coaching. So in this unusual hot weather that we're experiencing. I don't know how it is for you down there in Oxford.
Yeah, that's right. It is pretty sweltering. We're having a heat wave few days, even for July. It's abnormally hot.
It is. I'm not sure if I've brought enough summer clothes from Australia. So a good excuse to perhaps buy one or two extra cool clothes. But thank you, Charly, so much for joining us today. And, I love the work that you do. And I'm going to hand over to you shortly to introduce yourself. But I know that there has been a wonderful new, what's the word I'm looking for? Perhaps a launch of your book around climate coaching. So, Charly, over to you to share more about the work you do and this book that's been launched.
Thanks, Janine. So my name's Charly Cox. I'm the co-founder of the Climate Change Coaches, and we're a company that helps organizations shift culture around climate. And we train people in how to use coaching skills to help people move from a sense of powerlessness back into a feeling of capability so they can take action on climate. And I'm also, as you said, the co-author of our new book, Climate Change Coaching, The Power of Connection to Create Climate Action, which looks to put all of these skills that we've been using as a team and we've been training people to use into the hands of people who can buy a book. So we wanted to democratize these skills. And so it's a really practical 280 pages with lots of practical examples and made up conversations so you can see how it goes wrong and how it goes right, and skills that people can use to shift people from one place to another by using a coaching approach to these issues.
What a great handbook that you've created. And I know we've spoken about it before, and since I've been here in the UK, I'm still here. Listeners, if you've noticed that I have been recording these podcasts, recent podcasts in the UK, I know that we've been talking about that book in recent times. So it's on my agenda to get, because I think it will be such a powerful resource to have to be able to support these climate conversations, which for me is incredibly important, coming from Australia and the place where I live, which I know is perhaps under threat many, many years, I hope, down the track. But this is such an important conversation to have. And so, again, I'm really, really thrilled that you're here today, Charly, to support coaches who potentially still may be a bit hesitant about having these conversations. And yet we know that more and more of these conversations will occur. And we were talking earlier before we came onto the podcast, and you were sharing, Charly, about the developments that are happening here in the UK. And I believe that's really important to share. So again, Charly, if you'd like to share what you shared with me earlier, I think that's really important for coaches to be aware of.
It certainly feels that in Europe there's a lot changing around the way that climate change is positioned, particularly in organizations, but also to the public. And just as a small segue before I sort of explain what I mean by that, I think the skills that we've got in our book apply to any big systems challenge. And in a way, we were able to check them against COVID-19 and the way that people responded there. So if you are a coach listening and you've not done anything around one of these big challenges before, you may nevertheless have coached clients who landed in front of you in the last couple of years and said, I'm so overwhelmed. I feel so threatened. I don't know what to do about this, about COVID. And a lot of what we're talking about in the book applies directly to that. But it also applies to things like, social injustices, the sort of diversity and inclusion agenda, all of these big systems, existential problems that we struggle to put our hands around individually, create two big fears for us. Not only the classic coaching, can I do it? Coach, do you believe I can do it? But also, do you think we can do it? And we saw that with COVID. I know I can follow the rules, but I don't see anyone in this community doing it. So actually, therefore, should I follow the rules? And so these two things can either build each other up or they can dismantle each other. And so we have to be scaffolding people's individual sense of agency as well as their collective sense of belief. So those are the two pieces, if you like, that are different in climate coaching to normal coaching, I would say. But to go back to what you asked me, that the where that matters is in organizations. In organizations, that collective lack of belief can be strong, even at an organizational level. So there's not enough resources in this place, or I'm the only one that cares, can be a real barrier to people taking action. So there's a lot of remit for coaches to work in organizations to help them transform around this agenda. And there's the push from organizations that we're seeing is coming around either the organization itself declaring some kind of climate targets. So that might be as extreme as we've declared a climate emergency. So those guys, or it may be, we can't get insurance as a multinational unless we have carbon reduction targets in place, and we can't get financing either. So we've worked with banks, for example, that won't, have set a deadline on when they will lend to organizations that haven't got a carbon reduction plan in place. So at the big end of the scale, big business is already on this train. It's been working on this for a long time. But where things seem to be shifting is that in looking at their carbon footprints, organizations realize that they can minimize the footprint that is physically in their buildings. But actually, a lot of their carbon footprint is held in their supply chain, where their suppliers are making things on their behalf. And that carbon is attached to the end buyer's footprint. That's what they call scope 3 emissions. So increasingly, I'm hearing from the M end of SMEs that their buyers, their big clients, their big business clients are looking to them and saying, so what plans have you got to reduce your footprint? And for those guys, yes, there's a big role for the technical people who will help them work out how to do that. There's a massive role for those guys. But there are also coaches in those places. And in those places and in the big multinationals, coaches are doing very similar work, which is they're helping people stay true to their sense of purpose and motivation to do, if you like, the right thing, and helping them overcome all the fear and the overwhelm and the scarcity that comes with big change. And so in all of these places, there are coaches already. Your listeners may be them. They may be the coaches already. So I don't want them to make up a story that climate change coaching is something over there for other people to do, because you may find that you're sitting in a conversation with coaches that find themselves working in those organizations. May feel that they're not climate change coaches per se. And I'd hate them to make up a story that it's something that's over there for other people, because they will find themselves in a conversation with a coachee, a leader in one of those businesses who says, my biggest clients just told me, unless we make this change, we're out, or we've got to make this change by this deadline. Or who may feel really motivated to do something, but need help bringing the rest of their directors on board. And leaders in those organizations who are coaches may also want to just pay attention to these shifting and newer organizational agendas as they come in. One of the big upsides here is that in all the organizations that we work with, where we do group coaching with teams, as well as training leaders in how to use coaching skills, frequently in the conversations we're having, staff report huge spikes in loyalty and pride in their organization when their organization has made some kind of climate commitment.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear. And I can hear that shift is taking place, and it's like that ripple effect. It's that snowball effect. It's getting bigger and larger. And I was with some friends on the weekend who were sharing about their young kids who are learning about climate change, but not in the school. They're learning about it from other sources. And so my friends were sharing their surprise that their kids were very aware about using palm oil, for example, and not wanting to use it, and telling their parents, we don't want any products like Doritos that use palm oil. Sorry, Doritos. So there is this big shift, isn't there, especially with the younger generation coming up. The other thing that my friend shared with me was at school, whenever they mention Greta's name, all the kids cheer and say her name and put their hands up saying Greta. So the change is inevitable. It's coming, and yes, there's a lot more to do. So Charly, what do you think perhaps is the biggest challenge for coaches who may not be so aware of this, and perhaps a little bit, that's not me, I don't do that work. That would mean I would be leading the agenda. Perhaps that's something that I hear often. What do you say to that when you hear that?
I have enormous compassion for that perspective, because I definitely found myself stuck with that perspective for a long time, wanting to do something but not wanting to wield some kind of aggressive agenda. Fundamentally, I don't believe it works in changing people's minds or perspectives, and I've learned since, as a result of writing the book and doing research for that it doesn't work. So the reason our book is called The Power of Connection to Create Climate Action is that we learned time and again, and we have 40 contributors in the book from across sustainability and academia and coaching, who have examples of how connecting really well with people, building a relationship with people, the kind of relationship that coaches build that has this enormous vulnerability and strength to it, sort of robust relationships that coaches almost magically build, don't we? Those relationships have the ability to change minds, to help people believe that change is possible and that change doesn't necessarily need to be painful or scary, and therefore get people onto the pitch. So I definitely understand that coaches want to hold as sacred the desire not to have an agenda. And so that's why I say, actually that agenda is already out there. Compared to even 6 years ago when I first started talking about this with people, we are in a different territory again. Even by 2018, we were in a different territory. Things are moving very quickly now. It is taken as a given that climate change is happening. It's happening right now. And in some senses, everyone's job will be a climate change job, because it is the context in which all life is now lived, not in the future, not in 100 years, but right now. We're seeing, as we were talking about earlier, in Australia, flood events, Sydney having more rainwater in one day than London had in a year. These are not normal events. So in a sense, it's there and it's under the surface, and we only have to scratch the surface as coaches to get it out. And so the first thing we did as climate change coaching, the climate change coaches, was we went to a market. We were invited to this market. We came along as a group of coaches, and we just offered free coaching about climate change to the public. And we, do you want some coaching? And they said, I guess so. And we stood in the freezing cold in this market. It was December, just having a conversation. What we didn't do was tell them about the facts, because we didn't know. We're not scientists. We're not climate experts. We're concerned citizens just like them. But we do have a superpower, which is coaching. So instead of saying, oh, you're right, it's dreadful, isn't it? Oh, I don't know what to do either. Instead of saying that, we said, well, so I think you sound a bit overwhelmed. And like, oh, yeah. So what do you know about yourself when you're overwhelmed? And what do you normally do to help dig yourself out of it? And instead of responding to the facts level, we responded to the emotional level. Because that's what we do. We hear that level. We can't help ourselves, can we? We just, sort of, once we're trained, it's like we can read the subtitles. And it's that level that I think coaches have this incredible ability around in this regard, because nobody at that market said, I don't really care about climate change. What they said was, I'm really frightened, I'm really concerned, I'm a bit worried, and I'm just putting it to the back of my mind because I don't know what to do with it. And I looked across this market and I saw people hugging the coaches who are now in my team.
Wow.
With relief. And they talked for maybe 5 minutes. So we proved the concept that you can coach this topic. I think what I'd really love people to realize is that for as much as climate change has been put into this bucket called polar bears and trees, or wind farms, if you like, is another one. If you think about the images, that's what people think. Actually, climate change is about us. It's a human created problem. So therefore, if we created it, the solution has to be with us too. It's not the polar bears that need to change their behavior. The polar bears aren't buying Doritos, for example. Yeah. It's us. So hang on a minute then. If it's a human problem, we have tons of very well-researched, long-standing human change tools, a very strong one of which is coaching, which is, to my mind, psychology applied in a very practical way. So why aren't we using that as coaches? And I think we're not using it because we figure that to do something about climate means getting into a lane called activist. And we don't want to be activists. And I don't blame anyone. I don't want to be an activist in the sense of being an agitator and a disruptor. It's just kind of not, I like being an innovator, but I'm not sure I want to be an agitator.
Yes.
And so, and I know many activists for whom that's their theory of change. And I think that's quite right, actually, that we need lots of different ways of shifting systems.
Yes.
One, this is too complicated for one way. So, activists have a lane, and quite right too. Coaches don't need to assume that in order to do something about climate change, that's the lane they have to get into. They can if they want. And I know activists who use coaching skills with other activists. But I think when we're talking about using coaching skills to help people have the space for reflection and to feel a sense of empowerment again, then that's something that we can use right now with clients we're working with. We can offer, we can say, hey, do you want to talk about this? And if they say no, we can say, okay, no problem. And walk away, carry on with the coaching, but walk away from the issue. So I feel like the other thing we have as coaches that is really valuable that I would just want to also say briefly is coaches have a presence that is very important here. We can often trip up into thinking only about doing, but if we think about the debate around climate, particularly, in Australia, where you're from, it was very polarized and quite nasty politically. And so coaches, our very being is about non-judgment and compassion and acceptance and holding a sense of uncertainty. You could tell me, I want to be the next Prime Minister of Australia. And it's not my job to say, Janine, I think you should really get real here. It's my job to say, yeah, okay. Because in 20 years you could be, or in 10 years. Tomorrow, probably not, because, you haven't formed a political party. But in 10, you never know. So my job is to hold that uncertainty and that belief. And I think that's another really important just behavior here, that we can hold at the school gates when we pick up our kids and talk to other parents, in the corner shop when we chat to the owner and he mentions flooding, with our member of parliament in their constituency office when we go as a concerned citizen. We can use these behaviours everywhere as a way of building bridges and helping people feel safe enough to come onto the pitch. whatever they believe. And, you know, coaches hold a belief that even seemingly insane views have sane reasoning. And I think that's very important in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you've shared here, Charly, and I believe it's potentially not, you know, this coaching around climate is perhaps not even just those, you know, those straightforward coaching assignments that we have. As you said, it's having those conversations at the school gate, at the pickup, or at the local shop, or whatever it may be. And one of the things that I discovered a couple of years ago when those horrendous Australian bushfires took place, and I felt absolutely helpless. And for me, it was a combination of people, wildlife, the terrain, losing so much. It was a combination of things for me where I thought, what can I do? What can I do? Knowing that I had this busy practice of coaching and coach training and so much more, what could I do? That was the question that I was asking myself, and I felt helpless. And then I came across the Climate Coaching Alliance, and all of a sudden I became part of this network where I realized, there is so much that I can do. And one of the things that I have done since then has been to join an organization, a volunteer organization called the Queenscliff Climate Action Group, which is in my area of where I live back in Australia. And so I've joined them as a volunteer to support them with potentially coaching opportunities mainly as a group, working with organizations, working with a whole group of people that come together which is a combination of individuals and organizations to support climate action in this borough that I live in. And it's been amazing just to, again, work with individuals, groups, teams on a volunteer basis, and who knows where it may lead. But I feel like I'm finally able to do something that is positive, that is supporting the regeneration of the area. So every little bit that I contribute to that is just so rewarding because of the journey I'm going on for myself, but also the connection with the people that do this work. And of course, it's led, this awakening has led to so much other pieces of work that I'm doing with other coaches. And so there's many ways that we can do something that supports the world that we live in to create a better future, a better way forward, or to flex and to adapt and be able to hopefully meet the challenges of the future. So, and of course, that discovery has led to me right here, right now with you, Charly. So,
and what you named there is so important. The sort of the two pieces. One is finding other people. So isolation is a really big problem in this space. It is the single thing that will send people off the pitch back to where they were before. And indeed, sometimes as a coach, I have people come to me because I'm the only person that gets it, that believes them in their social circle or their family. And they're told, you should calm down, you shouldn't be so worried about this. And they come to me and they say, I am worried, and no amount of telling me to calm down is going to make me. And so until they find a tribe, I might be the surrogate tribe. And you may have coaches listening who resonate with that. So definitely finding others is really important. The other piece is just accepting that action will be imperfect. You know, for as much as we all know that we're not going to be the hero and there's not going to be a silver bullet, our brains sort of want there to be. And so very quickly we can talk ourselves out of doing things, partly because we think, well, I can't do this on my own. If we can accept imperfect action that feels really good, then we're well on the way to doing two things. One, building our own sense of agency, which will keep us doing it. But two, and this is again that point about connection, when you talk to people, as you just talked to me about what you're doing, it sounds really inspiring. It sounds like the kind of thing I'd like to do. I think, oh, that's great. If I lived there, that sounds really fun. She looks like she's having a ton of fun doing that. And so I'm likely then to be enrolled, because you sound not just having it like you're having a good time, but you sound purposeful and like you've got meaning. And I want that, so I'll come too. And so that's the second piece that we can be doing, not just doing stuff ourselves, but making sure that doing is resonant, not dissonant, because lots of people will do things, and I've done them too, that you feel you should do, we ought to do. And in fact, in the book, there's a case study from somebody who comes into a coaching practice with Elizabeth Betchard, who wrote the case study she's a coach in America. And she said, I really want to do something, but I'm going to have to go on marches and be an activist. And I don't want to do that. I just, and at the end of it, Elizabeth has helped the client to realize her way of taking action, which is around composting and gardening, and feels so much more nourishing for her. And that's another thing coaches can do here. We can say, okay, so I can hear that thing you want to do doesn't sound great, even though you're talking about it like you want to do it. Should we just check in on that a bit, just the way we would with any other topic? And I think we've put this in a different box as coaches, in the same way that maybe a few years ago we put diversity and inclusion in a different box and said, oh, it's not my job to talk about that with people. Maybe we are starting to find our systems feet as coaches. And so we can really help people to not feel alone and to find really resonant action. And then they just, when people connect it and start taking action together, it ripples. And we see people just swimming like shoals of fish. And that's what changes systems, when people move together and they move well together. So the other piece for coaches, just very briefly, is that coaches can help groups stay together through change. So I'd put money on the fact that in your group, Janine, even though it's maybe not even in your brief to do it, you'll just be helping people have more skillful conversations with each other, helping people resolve conflict, because it's easy to come together, but it's hard to stay together as a group. And we frequently see groups splintering and falling apart, not because people stopped caring about the issue, but because they just found it difficult to work together as a group. Yeah. So, that's another place that coaches can be really useful while staying very much in their lane as coaches, without having to sort of have some kind of agenda they don't want to have.
Yeah. And yes, that's absolutely my hope, to support that group. But it's such a strong, committed, connected group. I believe it won't be the group itself that perhaps I might be having those coaching conversations, although, I have done some facilitation work for the group, with the group. But I believe it will be the conversations with the organizations and the individuals to support them, because this group is just so tightly knitted together. And I've come along a little bit after they've come together, so it's already made a huge impact in the area. So I'm really excited about what's possible in the future. So, but again, I love what you've just shared. It's about our own personal journey, and looking at what resonates with us, and what we can do as coaches to just even make those little tiny changes through the conversations that we have, that, as you say, it ripples out. And I love that you brought in that systems work, because this work, climate change work, is so systemic, isn't it? And it has that impact on diversity and inclusion, and looking after people who potentially will lose their land. Having these conversations is so important, to be able to look after not only Mother Earth, but the people who live on it. So it is incredibly important, impactful work that we can do as coaches. So thank you, Charly, for bringing your wisdom and your experience and knowledge about the work in this area, and how we can choose to be as coaches, and therefore what is it that we want to do that will, again, just make those continuous ripple effects out into the world. So Charly, before we close off, is there anything else that you would like to share, that an invitation here to share any tips or wisdom that you'd like to impart before we close out?
Gosh, how to condense things. Well, as a shameless plug, we have a training course running in October for coaches, which is ICF accredited for CCUs, for continuing education points. So take a look at that on our website, which is climatechangecoaches.com. And I guess what I'd love people to do is not to look at climate change only from the lens of the anxiety and the grief and the things you normally hear about when you think about it, but also think about this huge opportunity for motivation, for purpose, for meaning that we can help people to find. And goodness knows, when we look at the stats about how disengaged people are with work, it is terrifying that the majority of people report feeling low to no meaning in their jobs or disengaged with their jobs. So this is a way that we can start to turn those numbers, not just for the benefit of the organizations they work for and their colleagues, but also for their benefit, that we have generations of people going to work 5 days a week in something that really feels like it's making a difference. And as coaches, again, we're often in OD, we're often working to help people do that, whether they're an organizational client or an individual client. And I really feel like there's a huge well of meaning available to us when we start acting on the climate crisis.
Beautiful. A beautiful piece of wisdom for our listeners. And listeners, I trust that you will take even just a little piece of what Charly has shared to support you and your practice, and again, to make that purposeful difference in the world that is going to support that better place to be in the future. So thank you, Charly. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your experience. And coaches, if you want to find out more about Charly, I know you've just shared your website address, but they can also find you on LinkedIn, Charly?
Yep. You can find me as Charly Cox on LinkedIn, and you can also find the Climate Change Coaches on LinkedIn as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Charly. I appreciate you and what you do.
Thanks, Janine. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.